What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So one of the big pieces of news that I actually overlooked just because of life events and things going on was the fact that Duel Links, or I guess Speed Duels more specifically, are actually going to become a sanctioned event, and they're going to be selling product that people can actually buy and play a physical version of Speed Duels, or I guess if you want to just call it Duel Links. Now, this is really interesting to me for a couple reasons, because I'm starting to wonder if Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting to transition in that direction because it's a much more simplistic way to play the game, and it's kind of having me think of the long-term implications that having something like Duel Links or Speed Duels is going to have on the main TCG itself. And this had me thinking, what if the real Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, the one that we all know, what if it actually had these dual skills that Duel Links has incorporated into it? I thought this would be a really interesting video, so that's what I'm going to bring to you today. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest YouTube channel members, as always. So big shout outs today to Florian, to Ken, and Snow Roach. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support the channel through a YouTube channel membership, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I thought I'd go ahead and start off by discussing how would this work, because I feel the best way to implement something like a dual skill in the physical TCG would kind of like having a certain card that you would just kind of have off to the side, kind of like where you'd have like your side deck, your extra deck, all that, or maybe it's something that you place next to your side deck. Now, the thing is, I think the best way to go about doing this is that the dual skill card, I guess it would be a card, I don't know what else it would be, but the card itself would be set face down. It would almost be like kind of like having an additional back row where the card doesn't get revealed until either the trigger is met to activate the dual skill or the player opts to use it. Now, I think this would be a very interesting dynamic because it kind of adds a different element to the game where you're one by one slowly having to go through all the dual skills available in the game to try to figure out which one your opponent has. I mean, obviously, if your opponent doesn't use one right away when the game begins, that's going to take away a significant amount of them. But as the game progresses, you can slowly start through the process of elimination, figuring out what they might have. And then that's where the skill comes in, because then you have to figure out ways to play around it. So what I did was, I looked up the dual skills that are on Duel Links, and I picked a handful of them and pretty much just wanted to discuss them with you guys and pretty much just talk about them in the broader sense of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. So the first one, a lot of the different characters in the game have this skill, is the ability to start with a specific field spell in your field spell zone. Now, this would be crazy for decks that are reliant on the field spell. Imagine if True Draco could start the game with Dragonic Diagram already in the field spell zone. That would just be ridiculous, but from a consistency standpoint, it would actually be rather interesting. I know field spell decks are already really overpowered. We have 3 terraforming and things like that, but only decks that would really benefit from ignition-based field spells or field spells that have a permanent lingering effect, say something like Necro Valley, would really benefit from this. Now, it might be interesting to see something like this incorporated, but it's only for a particular set of decks. But maybe having something like Diagram available immediately right off the bat for True Draco might be a little bit too good, but it's something fun to think about. Now, the next dual skill is something called Destiny Draw, and basically if your life points go below a certain amount or if you take so much damage, rather than drawing for your normal draw phase, you're able to pick any card out of your deck. Now, I think for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The TCG at least, that would just be completely and utterly overpowered. Now, granted, you have to be in a losing position, but I think there's too many instances in the TCG where if you're behind, if you get one specific card out of like several, it can kind of get you back in the game. So if you're in that position where your back's against the wall, this skill would be really, really good because it kind of just guarantees that you're going to be able to come back and might be able to win. However, the trade-off is you're using a skill that requires you to basically be losing in order for it to trigger. So if you don't lose very often, this skill isn't that good. So this is kind of an interesting skill maybe for more like novice or intermediate players that maybe don't have a good grasp on the game and can kind of give them a bit of a comeback mechanic. Maybe it might be a bit more balanced that you just draw an extra card instead of picking the card directly out of your deck. I think that might be a little bit more balanced, but it's one of those things where I think it would kind of just be this interesting dynamic where the players who do really well at the game wouldn't necessarily want this because they want to be in a more proactive position rather than a reactive position. But it also helps the players who might be struggling to get a good grasp on the game and kind of help them in a different way. The next duel skill is called Beatdown. This gives all monsters increased attack points based on specific criteria. I think in Duel Links, I think it gives them depending on how many level 5 or higher monsters are on the field, something like that. This would be interesting for a couple reasons, because not only does it allow you to get more damage in, but the fact that it makes your monsters slightly bigger for a turn, I think is actually really cool. What's one of the biggest problems with Trickstar? Well, Trickstar can't get over anything that pretty much has 1800 or more attack because Candina is the biggest monster in the deck. Well, if you had the Beatdown skill with your Trickstar deck, you can get your Candinas to 21, maybe 2400, things like that, and now they can actually get over those monsters. So a skill like this, not only does it help you get more damage in and potentially facilitate more OTKs, but it also kind of helps fill the weaknesses that some decks may have, especially the decks with lower attack ranges, and I think that might be pretty cool. It might be a little bit overpowered again just because OTKs are so prevalent in the trading card game, but you know, it's kind of a cool idea to play around with. The next skill is something called Life Point Boost. You just start with some extra life points, maybe like 1,000 or 2,000. This is interesting because there are cards that, you know, kind of require you to have higher life points or lower life points depending on the situation. So having that discrepancy could actually be a good thing. But again, it's kind of a skill where, depending on the circumstances, this may be something you just might want to have. It might be a little bit overpowered if you're going into time because, oh look, game 3, I start with an extra 1,000 life points. Well, I just win automatically. So I could see that being a little bit problematic, but it's still one of those skills that's interesting from all different perspectives because there's so many cards that where life points matter, where I think it would be really interesting to implement. The next skill is called Grit. Now this one is really cool. This is probably the first skill that kind of works like a trap card rather than something that would automatically apply at the beginning of a turn or something like that. So Grit basically means that you will survive all damage with 1 life point intact. This would be really interesting for a couple reasons. First off, let's say we're in like an FTK format. Well, if you have the Grit skill, that's basically going to make it that you can't get FTK because you're going to be on 1 life point, your opponent won't be able to do any further damage for the rest of the turn, and even though they have the FTK, they can't actually kill you. So this is where the meta of these skills can actually come into effect, because if we get to an FTK format, well, everyone can start using the Grit skill to basically ensure that they don't get FTK'd. So it's almost like a safeguard from FTKs in that respect. Same thing goes if someone doesn't want to get OTK'd. It's a very reactive type of skill, but if you don't want to die, I mean, it's a pretty good way to work around that. Now, obviously stuff like Trickstar can work around this because Lycris will just burn on the next turn and you'll lose anyway, but I think the way that this would work would actually be rather interesting from the perspective of safeguarding from FTKs and really aggressive OTK strategies. Really, really cool. The next one is called Life Cost Zero, and this one's a little bit crazy because basically when you use it, you don't have to pay life point cost for any card for the duration of the turn. So imagine if you're a hero player and you get to play a Hero Lives for free. That would just be nuts. That's kind of the bane of all hero players' existence, is having to do that and start off the game at 4,000 life points just so they can get a Dark Law. But if you have the skill, you get to use that for free, and that's pretty damn good. There's also a bunch of other instances as well. Maybe you have like a specific trap card that you don't want to pay for, like Solemn Strike or something, or maybe just there's so many other cards that require you to pay life points for cost that this skill could actually be rather handy in the right circumstances. The next one is called Duel Standby. This is a skill that gives both players one extra card at the start of the game. Now, I really like this, especially for the TCG, because one of the biggest things is that when you go first, especially if you're playing like an FDK deck or a combo deck or something that's really just trying to go off, you want as many combo pieces as possible, right? So you have the advantage to get an extra card in your hand, but so does your opponent. So while you're getting an extra combo piece, your opponent might be drawing into an extra hand trap. So it creates this really interesting dynamic where you have to use your duel skill to gain extra advantage, but you have to worry about what your opponent might draw, and you still have to worry about your opponent's duel skill at the same time. So the dynamic a card like this creates is really fascinating, and then especially if you don't get your combo off, your opponent's going to have even more cards to work with when it comes back around to their turn. So really, really neat. The next one is called Aroma Strategy. Now, I believe this allows you to see the top card of your own deck. That's pretty good just in general, knowing what you're going to draw next. I know there's a lot of shuffling in Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, so, you know, sometimes even though you could know what's on top, it's not really going to matter. What would be interesting, though, if the opposite were true, if you could see what's on top of your opponent's deck. So say, for instance, you're playing a deck like Spiral, and your duel skill allows you to look at your opponent's top card at any given moment. Well, that's amazing, because that means you're going to guarantee call everything with spirals, and now you're not just blind calling luck, and it ups the consistency of a deck like that significantly at the cost of using your duel skill. The next card is, or excuse me, the next skill is called Restart. This one is really, really interesting, and I might do a whole video about this. So this basically allows you to shuffle your starting hand back into your deck and draw a brand new hand. You know when you're going up against a deck like Goki or an FDK deck, or a deck that pretty much will just win on turn one if you lose the die roll? Well, if you have this skill, you can go ahead and shuffle your hand back, and hopefully on the mulligan, you actually draw a hand trap. So this makes it so that if you don't draw a hand trap going second, you don't automatically lose the game, and you can use your duel skill to allow you to have that second chance and basically not just automatically lose. Same thing goes for maybe decks that might not be super consistent going first, but they have the potential to be explosive if they go off. So again, the dynamic there is just so fascinating to me, and I might do a whole video just about mulligans in Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. Let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing that. The last skill I wanted to talk about, though, is Mind Scan. Now, this one is really next level because it allows you to look at your opponent's set cards. Now, I don't know if there'd be a restriction, like if you can only do this once, or kind of how that would work, but knowing what your opponent has set in the back row has tons of valuable information. And even though your opponent might know what you have set, they still have to play around everything. So if you're going up against like a Paleozoic player or an Altergeist player and you see all 5 of their set back row, that's really good, but they still have to play through it. So there's an inherent balance in a way, but having that knowledge can be so invaluable in kind of deciding what makes sense in terms of what plays you want to do. So again, I wanted to just bring you guys this video to kind of get just get the brain juices flowing in terms of how cool it might be to actually have these skills incorporated into the game. Now, I know the game is already complex enough as it is, and adding another element like this might be a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time, it could also fix some of the problems with the game that a lot of us complain about rather often, and it might add a nice new element of skill depending on how it were implemented, and, you know, basically, it could just make Yu-Gi-Oh! Just even better than what it is now. So, that's really all I wanted to discuss today. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about incorporating these skills into the physical TCG. Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Do you think there's any other skills from Duel Links that might actually be really cool if they were implemented into the physical TCG? I'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts. So, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. And if you found this video informative, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.